In this video, we're going to attempt to do pattern 18. Now this one's probably kind of interesting to some of you because you're looking at this kind of beginner folder and you see this and you're like, is this a beginner pattern? Because there's like multiple tones, there's a lot of like overlapping shapes, like how do we get this little, kind of star pattern? What about this dude? Triangles. This is like kind of a weird looking hexagon. So how do you do this? Now, this one's kind of surprising because it looks much more complicated than it really is. And there's one node we're going to use in here called a flood fill that's going to end up simplifying this a lot. The main thing that we want to take from this is if you ignore the colors and the different shades of gray, if you just look at the black outline, focus on that for a second, look at how those repeat. See that hexagon? That's a hexagon. This is a hexagon. That all this is literally hexagons overlapping with each other. And if you really just kind of take a step back and just look at that for a second, you'll notice that is all the lines. It is only hexagons. There's nothing else fancy going on here. So how do we do this? Let's go back. Let's make a new project. We're going to call this pattern, was this 18? Yeah, pattern 18. So pattern 18, empty template, 2048 by 2048. Let's hit OK. Now in pattern 18, we're going to start off by doing the obvious thing. Let's make a hexagon. So we can do that with the polygon node. Now I kind of want to get the rotation right, so it should be flat on the top. The point is on the sides. That's going to be an easy fix. Okay, do we have rotation? We do. Let's do 90 degrees to flip it. Okay, and I'm just going to bring this down a little bit because I'm going to do an edge detect on it. I know before we've had some issues where the edge detect on a shape, when it gets to the border, will kind of do some weird effects. Let's bring this down to like 0.9 just so I don't run into any weird border issues. Okay, from here, edge detect. Okay, so it's black. All right. Now I know even though this is black right here, technically the way we want to build this thing is we may want to have this set up to be white initially. I usually like to kind of get the primary shapes I'm working on to be the white part. Now this is a little bit of a curve to it. Let's see if I can see that in the reference. That looks pretty sharp to me. So in the edge detect, let's just bring down the roundness. Okay. Now from here, since we have kind of that shape, I don't know if the width is right. Actually, it's probably pretty close. I'm going to leave the width the way it is. Let's just try to tile it and find out what happens. So tile, generator. And again, I have to make sure this goes into the pattern input, not the background. And on the generator, let's put this to image input so it reads from this guy. Now this is obviously tiling way too much. So what do we have to do? Well, what I'm kind of looking at here is if you just look at the hexagon patterns, it's kind of weird because in this row, if you just look at that kind of center kind of star shape, because that's in the middle of every hexagon, this has 1, 2, 3, and the fourth repeats. This row has 1, 2, 3, 4. So 4, 4, 4, 4. And vertically, if you count, is 1, 2, 3, 4 vertically. So this is, at its heart, a 4x4 repeating pattern. It's just there's a very strange looking diagonal offset. Okay, so let's just kind of go with our instincts on that. So back to the generator, we're going to put this to 4x4. Okay, so now they're in line. How do we offset it? We're just going to scroll down a little bit and we are looking for this position offset. And you'll notice how when I move this over, see how it staggers them? And when you have it right at 0.5, this makes sure that every other row is lined up, but the other row is offset by 50%. That is exactly what we want. We're getting closer. So let's go back here. Okay, so the top one, those 4 center points are in the middle. Those 3, there, that edge one repeats. Let's see if we got that. That's actually what's kind of happening right now. So the only thing I think I'm missing is the scale. So let's bring this up. Look what's happening. So when they overlap, it's kind of doing the right effect. Now I need to kind of see what we're going to do with these guys. So that needs to be scaled to make a triangle. Okay, I'm just kind of looking at the shape. So I think right there might be about right. Let's double check that. Let's minimize all this stuff for a second so I can see it. Yeah, I think we've got it. That looks really close to me. All right, I think we've got this. So I just scaled it up to about 1.9. That feels correct. You can tell like that actually wasn't that difficult, and this does tile. Only 3 nodes. Now, the kind of the interesting part about this thing now is getting the shading to do what we want. And this is a really cool opportunity to show you guys an extremely powerful set of nodes called flood fill, and a couple other nodes that connect with the flood fill. So if I just hold space, type in flood, this is kind of new-ish in Designer. It's been around for maybe a year now, 2 years. But basically the way this thing works is a flood fill node will pull from the different black and white information of a pattern, and it will output that into different types of results. Like randomized grayscale colors. It'll shade it differently based on the size of the shapes, where they're positioned in 0 to 1 space. It'll apply gradients to them. There's a ton of use for this thing, and this is one of my favorite things in Designer. But let's just start off by using the flood fill, the first one. This is always where you start. Now, the flood fill is looking for white shapes. So the white is what it's trying to use. Now is the point where I need to flip it, because I want it to read the shapes in here, not the border. So before we even go to the flood fill, let's invert this thing to that. So invert grayscale. This goes in the flood fill. You can kind of see it has a weird looking like rainbow alpha effect, but just don't worry about that. Now the flood fill needs to go into one of its many different outputs. Now the one we're going to try doing here is going to be bounding box size. So you'll see it says takes the flood fill node as the input, which we've got, and it's going to sort of randomly shade the value based on the size of each shape. And if you look back at the reference here, you'll notice that they are shaded by the shape. See how when the shapes get smaller, they're darker? This is the biggest one. That's the lightest color. So this is really the trick. So if I do the flood fill to bounding box, put that right next to it, connect into it, look what's already happened. Now it's not the right tone, so it's a little too dark overall, but aside from that, if you just kind of look at what's happening, like that is almost exactly right. So the last thing we're going to do is I could either use a levels just to like play around with the contrast, or I could do auto levels. And in my example, like when I built this thing, I just use auto levels. All auto levels does is it basically takes the black to white range in an image and tries to expand it to the full range of contrast. So it truly becomes a black to white, not black to dark gray. So I think that right there is probably exactly like, oh, that is, yeah, that's definitely it. We got it. So there we go. Not too bad. Kind of excited you guys get to see the little flood fill node, but we've already used this one. And one kind of quick note about this, because I think if you're kind of following these in order, if you're trying multiple different patterns, this is one of the only ones, or one of the first ones, where there's multiple shades of gray. And typically we've had alphas, like just black and white. The reason why we have some of these patterns with variations of gray means that if we bring this into Painter, we have multiple options and ways that we can use this. I could decide to have it so every internal shape is all the same color, or I can start picking and choosing from the different tones and actually designing like a wallpaper pattern that has like red in the stars, burgundy and these patterns next to it, maybe the triangles are kind of like a silver reflective material on top of the wallpaper. You can basically kind of almost color pick from the different shapes and to create these really kind of intricate, complicated patterns from one alpha map. It's pretty cool stuff. That'll make more sense once we get inside of Painter and start using these.